harm to others and believe that they would be causing harm to others, then their convictions should stand. Now, if we continue our little tour through witchcraft, well, 1684, the last conviction is in England under the witch trial legislation. It's Alice Molland of Exeter, but she is mostly found guilty for murdering 3 people. And in 1717 is the last English witch case in Leicester, but it's rejected by the court. And in 1736, witchcraft is decriminalised in England, but people still believe in witchcraft, particularly in the working class. Now, overall in Britain, there were around 1,500 executions for witchcraft, mostly in North Scotland. In England, you had 23 men and 290 women killed as witches. Now, across Europe, however, 50,000 are killed, mostly in Germany. But this is spread over 300 years. And this is something that should challenge us. I know that in the films on anything to do with medieval England, you will have the hero, normally played by Sean Bean. God, if they make a film of my life, I want to be played by Sean Bean. But Sean Bean riding through the English countryside, and he goes from village to village, and the horizon is lit by the pyres of burning witches. Simply not the case. Obviously, each one of these killings is a tragedy, but outside of Germany, not common. And so, one of our first questions is, given the idea that witches were everywhere, then one of our questions might have to be, why so few? But we have to understand that witch hunts were often due to pressure from below. I know in these films, it's always the evil landowner, the knight or the baron, who wants to smash the people and kill their wise woman that's in charge, that calls for witch hunts. But I'm afraid that's simply not true. Most witch hunts are caused by a demand from below, from the ordinary people. The governments are mostly suspicious of such pressures. They're trying to impose, in this time period, government upon the people. And they do what they can, in most cases, to hold back the people from this kind of mob justice. But a belief in traditional witchcraft carries on well into the 20th century. Now, if we look at the First World War, you will find, if you wander through the English countryside, witch bottles. They're glass bottles, often wine bottles, filled with iron, like nails and screws, buried into the ground. They've been buried by soldiers going off to the trenches in the First World War, hoping that these witch bottles will keep them safe from German witchcraft. And so if you do go wandering through the English countryside, when obviously self-isolation is at an end, then if you see one of these, don't destroy them, hand them into your local museum. They're of great historical interest. Now, one last thing I'm going to look at before I finish this first half of the video is who were these witches? Who were these victims? Well, obviously, mostly women, but not everywhere. In Iceland, around 90% of the people who are accused of being witches are male. In Estonia, around 60% of those people accused of being witchcraft are male. So it varies very much around Europe. Most of them are over 50, however, at least for legal proceedings. But that's because normally legal proceedings are a last resort against what they call cunning folk. People try to reason with witches in their midst and try and persuade them to stop what they're doing. They only resort to the legal proceedings as a last resort, which is why so many of them are over 50, as they've given up trying to come to an understanding. But if we're looking at the stereotype, the one thing that does ring true is that mostly they are single. Now, there's been a massive increase in the number of single women in this time period. Gentlemen, if you wanted to go courting, as it were, this time period, because there's a large number, an unusually large number of single women. You might say, why? It's because of the 30 Years' War, a brutal war across Europe fought between the Catholic South and the Protestant North. Germany is on both sides in this conflict. The North German states fighting the South German states, joined in by most European nations at one time or another. And the battlefield is mostly Germany. And so one society that definitely loses is the Germans, because they're on both sides and they're the battlefield. And so there are a lot of casualties. This is a national tragedy for Germany. It kills a higher percentage of their population than the First World War, to give you some idea. And so a large number of young men have been killed in the 30 Years' War, and this has led to a large number of single women. In some places in Germany, around a third of the population are single women, which gives you some idea of the scale of the loss this society has suffered. But carrying on with our stereotypes, then most of them indeed that have been accused of witchcraft are poor. It's very rare for rich, not unheard of, but it's rare for rich people to be accused of witchcraft. And there's one thing also that ties all of these victims together. They use foul language. And so this was not a good time to swear. In fact, if you were a single woman aged over 50 and you weren't well off, for the love of God, don't start swearing at your neighbours, because if so, then I'm afraid they're going to be getting the rope out for you. And so in the second video, we're going to be looking at why. Why did this happen?